I tell people with their projects, and they don't like me to tell you this, but the fact of the matter is almost every project you take on, you are starting behind schedule because of this matrix thing. We don't get all the people all the time, and we plan. This is our problem. We plan in effort hours. So we talk an expert. How long does it take? Says 8 hours. Okay, put 8 hours in the schedule. Well, they didn't bother telling you this guy's also committed to 3 other jobs at the same time. So his 8 hours is 4 days for you, and that's the way projects are. And then people wonder, well, why the hell am I behind schedule? Because you started behind schedule.
Coming right at you. PM Cowboy Podcast. Hi, this is your Project Management Cowboy coming back to you with our next podcast. We have an incredible privilege today to invite or to have a guest on our podcast who's an icon, an icon in project management in PMI. Lee Lambert, one of the founders of the PMP certification. He's going to tell us a lot about that. But we're going to go much deeper. I don't want to just see the persona, Lee Lambert. We want to kind of deep dive and kind of listen to him a little bit about what his passion journey was. Where does he come from? What did he do to be the great cheerleader that he is for project, program, and portfolio management? So Lee, welcome on board. I want to applaud you for your getup. Okay, you've got the PMI shirt on. Which PMI chapter is that?
Sri Lanka.
Okay. So we'll talk about all your journeys in just a little bit. And you've come in true nature with your cowboy hat. I want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, this hat has some history. It was presented to me at the Calgary chapter way back when I first went there. That's something they call the white hat ceremony.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's been at least 10, 15 years. I've hung on to it all this time.
Excellent. Well, now you have some use for it. Now, Lee, a lot of the people who are going to be looking at this will have heard of you and will know you. Some won't. We want to introduce you to new circles as well. But I'm not sure whether the people who know you and your persona at PMI and beyond that in your consulting world actually know so much about your background. So we've got a little bit of time on our hands. What I'd love for you to share with us is if you could tell us a little bit about your original background. Where did you start off in your project management journey?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I came out of school in '66 and went to work in Salt Lake City for a company called Chicago Bridge and Iron. And that was my first inkling that things aren't always what they seem, because it was in Salt Lake, not Chicago. They didn't do bridges and never worked with iron. So I was confused from the get-go.
No matter what words we use, it's not always what's in it when you look behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. That's kind of what I found out. It served me well over the years, but I didn't enjoy my work there. I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer by training. And this job was so exciting. What we did was design double wall cryogenic storage tanks.
Oh,
it doesn't get any more exciting than that.
Okay.
And so I got the heck out of there as soon as I could. Moved to Livermore, California, and went to work for the National Laboratory there, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, where our product was not double wall tanks; it was nuclear bombs, and so it was quite a switch. To do
Were
that.
you linked with Los Alamos by any chance?
No, we worked with us at Los Alamos, but we're Livermore National Lab, right across the street from Sandia. I mean, a lot of weapons stuff going on. And I liked the hours, a pretty much flexible time. And so I went to work for them, and for about, 3 years maybe, got to go down to Nevada, do some downhole test setup for them. And I enjoyed that, except I couldn't see a future with it. Nuclear bombs are a little risky, so I decided I'd get out of there and went to General Electric, where I eventually became the trainer for General Electric for earned value applications.
No way! That's saying a lot.
Yeah, and it was by accident. I mean, I realized that as an engineer I sucked, and so I looked for
No.
other.
Do you know the bingo terminology, I development and T development?
No.
That's a new HR terminology. HR people like to say when you start off, for example, in engineering, you start off as a novice, then you get your degree, then you go work a couple of years, and that's called the I development. So it's a vertical progression upwards in your skill set until you become a senior subject matter expert. And then they say, well, where do you go from that if you want to have a career? The next thing you have to do is you put the T on top, which means now you have to do lateral education. You need to learn something about risk management, quality management, project management, all those different things. So you were a T developed or oriented expert right from the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't even know it. No,
Well,
I should have copyrighted that when I had it. so, so I did that for about 3 years for the Quince River Breeder Reactor project when it was still alive, and found out I really liked it. That really
was that your
training
first exposure to projects? No, you started already
yeah,
back.
well, when I was an engineer, I'd have to manage obviously the projects I was responsible for. So I got a sense of what the concept was, and then when they brought me on to do this training for 300 engineers on this Clinch River project, then I began to really dig into the fact that everything's a project. And so when you think about it, the concepts of project management, the universal application is so broad, there's really no place you can say, well, that wouldn't apply, because it does. And so I started working towards that, and I found out that I had a penchant for one of my concepts was that I don't want to work. And so that fit well with what I was doing with training, because that's not work. And as I got to be more known for the training, I've trained about, I don't know, 50,000 people in 23 different countries, and they're all the same. I mean, I love it. I enjoy the people, and so I stayed with it until about 1981. I moved to Columbus, Ohio, where I am now, on a temporary 3-year temporary assignment. That was 44 years ago.
At least you're
And
consequent.
so my first, I mean, I hadn't even been in Columbus more than a few months when PMI requested the corporation sponsor me to come to PMI and assist in the development of a certification program.
Okay.
So that's where my fame, if you want to call it that, really started, was being one of the 5 people that initiated and expanded the PMI certification program.
Do you mind my asking what made I not that I would disagree with them, but what qualifications or what about your personality or background made
Well,
PMI
I
say
mean,
this is the guy we're
yeah, I
looking
think
for?
that's a real fair question. I don't think people understand that my pension is not working. I never was a big fan of it. So I found that this idea of certification set me up in a no work kind of an environment where I became a catalyst. I became a reference point for people to become certified. And I found that it gave me, it's sort of like a giant Toastmasters club is what it
Mm-hmm.
amounts to for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I spend now I spend all my time just doing what you and I are doing, and that is spreading the word, talking to
So
people
you've
about
gone
what
from
works.
technical engineering to what we call nowadays social engineering.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good term.
Yeah.
PMI keeps circling the wagons and making up new terms as they
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
but I think that's a good one. I think
I
social
call
engineering
some
is a
people
good
call
one.
it buzzword bingo, but we amongst us, I like to call it bullshit bingo. Not that it's bullshit, but if you use the terminology and don't know what it means, then it's bullshit. But
Yeah. Oh, well, I've always believed if I can't dazzle them with brilliance, I'm going to baffle them with bullshit. I mean, no doubt about that.
So, but you know what? You have a great wit and self humor about yourself. But you said you trained earned value, which is probably one of the most difficult and dry things to train. How did that jive with your outgoing and witty personality? You must have found, because obviously you must have done good if they kept you doing it such a long time.
Yeah, well, what I found, it was actually a perfect fit because most of the people I trained hated the idea of earned value. That
Yeah.
they ran. It's like when you turn the lights on and cockroaches
Oh,
scatter.
absolutely. Actually,
That's
very few
that's
companies
the way it
today even
was.
know how to do it because it's
Oh,
just it's ugh. But I think it's a great concept, but very few people manage to get it on the ground. So you committing yourself to that says a lot of actually quite a bit positive things about you. So I'm assuming you managed to find a way so people could actually pragmatically use it.
yeah, I actually converted people. I mean, I should have been a pastor. They were starting to come over in droves because I think I'm a big fan of earned value in terms of what it can do. It's a little complex sometimes, but the fact of the matter is, once you explain and do it with a sense of humor. Obviously, I use humor as one of my mechanisms to get people to come along. But once you do that and they grasp the concept of earned value, then they begin to see what the value is, and it's
Yeah.
pretty substantial. But
Yeah.
it does scare people off. There's no doubt about it.
This is how when I teach earned value, and I'm nowhere close to your level of understanding of earned value, but I'm a big fan of it. I often tell them, says, you know what, the first 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about earned value. What you think is going to be difficult is vocabulary, because it's new vocabulary, and kind of looking behind the curtains. It's kind of that Wizard of Oz principle, right? And once you look behind the curtain and you realize it's basically simple math, subtraction, and division,
Yeah.
and a couple buzzwords, and it makes a lot of sense, you're going to discover the true difficulty of earned value. And it has nothing to do with the process of earned value. It has to do with the fact that very few projects, even today, have the capability of chunking scope, time, and cost in such a manner that you can even measure it. That
Yeah.
level of
Well, I
detail,
agree.
people are hesitant to do it, and then of course with Agile, they say, we don't need that, which is not true. There's a huge element of earned value in the burn down charts of Agile thinking.
Of
So
course.
yeah, very, very
Of
interesting.
course.
So you came on board with the certification. Did they have to pitch it to you, or did they just wave the certification topic at you and you said, sure, I'll do it?
Yeah, I have some fun with that. Once we went live in '84, we got a note from PMI headquarters that said that you can't take the exam for 10 years. We thought we'd get grandfathered in, and instead we got to wait 10 years, which we all thought was a little bit ridiculous,
So
but
you
we
had to
didn't have
wait
a
10 years
choice.
until you could take a
10,
certification that you actually
yeah,
created?
yeah, it's unbelievable. And so we waited, and almost to the day, on 10 years, I got a letter saying, so you're okay to take the exam now. And I go, wow, it's been a while. Maybe I should go back and study. So I did. I studied for 2 or 3 hours, and sat for the exam in Altamont Springs with a bunch of AT&T people, and passed. So I got 100% on the exam.
No.
Back then it was 320 questions, not 200. And so I'm pretty
And
excited
back
about
in
that.
your day, even back in my day when I did the PMP, the PMBOK was fairly thin, but you had like this compendium of books, 12 or 15 books that you could theoretically read. There was a Kurtzner book, a couple other books that were recommended reading to be able to cover the scope of the questions.
Yeah, that's still pretty much the same, except the PMBOK grew to 800 pages for PMBOK 6. So when they went to 7 and pulled a bunch of stuff out, it's more like 300 pages. But they also then provide you a list of 10 or 12 items that you should be studying to prepare for the exam. And even though it's only 200 questions, it's a bitch of an exam.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's tough.
And
It's tough.
I think every time they roll out a new version, it doesn't get easier. I mean, it kind of evens out again, and then it comes to about the same level. But I think until people get a concept of what the new, I think sometimes they kind of just reshuffle the Rubik's cube, and that makes it a little bit confusing for
Yeah, I
training
agree.
purposes.
I agree with that. I think it creates a perception of change.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. So, did you, when they asked you to create the certification program, you obviously sat down and looked at the PMBOK, probably like for the first time, right?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah. What was your how big was that? What, 200 pages or 150 pages?
Well, the thing is, you have to remember is that there really wasn't a PMBOK until 96,
Okay.
an official published PMBOK. So from 84 to 96, you're flying by the seat of your pants.
But no, so the first PMBOK came out in 96, you said?
96 was the first published edition of the PMBOK.
And you guys created the PMP certification in?
And we created it in 81 to 84. That was the time frame.
Oh, I didn't even realize. So you guys had certification long before you had the PMBOK.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that. They keep thinking that, well, once you got the PMBOK, well, we didn't have a PMBOK for 12 years. I mean,
so how did that, this makes it even more interesting. How did you, how did you guys define scope of learning?
Mostly from senior level people that have been around a long time.
Like common sense.
Had
a couple of years.
They didn't need a PMBOK. They just knew that's what you did.
Yeah.
And so we had guys like Max Weidman out in Canada, out on the west coast of Canada. He was participating. A couple guys that subsequently were excommunicated from PMI for plagiarism and some things that probably weren't true at the time.
Okay.
But basically it was all volunteer stuff. And so when we made up the first exam that we rolled out in 84 in Philly, it was just a compendium of volunteer questions. People that were in the business suggested questions. And so that's how we got started. Now, of course, it's still suggestions by volunteers, but now it's much more formal. PMI actually has paid people who create the exams and so on. So it's gotten much more professional in the way we do.
Were you in it? Was the team that created the PMP certification in any form, I don't know, in the steering committee or in the stakeholder circle that around the PMBOK development as well?
Not as much. Again, they were trying to avoid any crossover
conflict of interest.
Yeah. And so I don't think many of us, I certainly wasn't me, were directly involved in the first PMBOK. It was only 119 pages, so it wasn't like a big deal. But that again, all volunteer. And the reason it grew to 800 is the same reason. All the volunteers wanted their name on the back page that said I contributed.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I did. You might not know this about me, but I was the chapter proponent and chapter president of PMI chapter Austria. So the founding father for about 10 years. And I always understood that, I think a community of practice is all about sharing, and it's nonprofit, and you need to watch out for conflict of interest. I'm a big fan of that. But I think if you have volunteers that are going to contribute, I think you should hold their name up high. And that's one of the things I really like about what I see how PMI is treating you, because I know a lot of people who did a lot of things for PMI that, that worked as a volunteer for PMI for 10, 20 years. And you don't hear of them anymore, and I find it a pity. I think I'm a big fan of giving credit where credit is due, and remembering the founding fathers, as you may, of an organization, because they're doing this on their free time, and the least thing that you can do is give them recognition. So I'm very happy every time I see you donning PMI and PMI puts your name out there. I said finally they're doing more of that. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, because basically when I negotiated this arrangement with PMI, that was really at the heart of what I was doing. I started out by just congratulating everyone who got their PMP on LinkedIn, get their name out there, let people know. And you should.
That's another way of giving back.
And so it's kind of morphed from that to basically I'm now a sort of an unofficial ambassador for PMI. And the more I can expose people as opposed to organizations, the better I like it.
And it's all about people. I remember my first, we weren't even a full chapter yet, but our first meeting was in Philadelphia. And I remember the spirit back then. It was so great. It had this classical parliament type thing, where all chapter presidents were involved, and all the brainstorming of where PMI should go globally was something that was discussed openly amongst chapter presidents. And I think it's another example of how a volunteer organization should have inclusive concepts and like I said, I also think if somebody's gonna commit to your certification and get a PMP, don't let them. I mean, not that it's that expensive, but don't let them just get the certification and then after that you never hear from them. Say thank you, put their name out there. It's also part of social media. This promoting each other, I think, is an important thing. Let me ask you another question. When you were first confronted with the idea of certification, what was your honest opinion?
My honest opinion was it'd be very good for my career.
Okay. There was some there. I think that's an honest answer. A little bit of self-interest. What did you mean? As so that you would have something to do, or that it would make a difference also in you? I think you were working for General Electric back then, right?
Yeah, well, I just moved over to Battelle Memorial Institute.
Okay. And you thought it would be an advantage to you in your professional life as well?
Yeah, to me, it was about the exposure that I was going to get personally and professionally.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, the opportunity to actually participate in something that we never anticipated go to
is bigger than yourself.
Million.
Yeah.
No way. But the fact of the matter was that we knew it was needed, and to be one of the founding people, that's a great opportunity. That doesn't come around very often. It's like shifting paradigms. It just doesn't happen.
So the underlying principle of the PMP to create a profession supported, independent gold standard that kind of is like a seal of approval for project management is something that had a good resounding value with you right from the get-go.
Yeah, that was our thinking was this. We back in those days, you're not old enough to remember this, but back in those days, project management was sort of a hobby. It wasn't a profession. If you're an engineer, they'd come to you and say, "Oh, and in your spare time."
On the side.
And so our real objective in the beginning was to professionalize project management. And we thought certifying, in fact, we interviewed a bunch of other organizations that had certifications of different types, and every one of them recommended if you want to get and keep the best people, offer them an opportunity to be certified and exposed as a professional. So that was really our driving force. It wasn't money by any stretch. We never, I don't even think that ever even crossed our mind.
Yeah.
And until we started to see, you got to remember in 1996, I took the exam in 1996. And at the time there were 6,000 PMPs.
Wow.
So 12.
What are we up to now? I think we're at 600,000, 700,000 worldwide.
No, we're at 1.45 million.
No, I'm behind the times. 1.45 million.
Yep.
Wow.
And growing every day. I spend about 3 hours a day on LinkedIn congratulating and talking to.
By the way, I'm going to say this in a platonic sort of way. I love you. I love you for the work you do. I think it's spot on. I think that's exactly what the spirit of our community should be about.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That was my intent. So if it hits home with you, hopefully it will with others as well. Yeah.
So we back then there was a couple thousand. Now we're at 1.5 million around. Okay. Yep. Let's maybe do a little bit of a fast forward and ask the question. If you look at the landscape of certifications right now, it's inflationary, right? I don't think it's difficult to remember how many certifications there are out there. I have my personal opinion, but I want to hear it from you first. How relevant is the PMP still?
Well, that it's kind of interesting you say that. It kind of depends on the two things, on your own personal desires to capitalize on the value of it. Mm-hmm. But second to that is, how does your organization feel about the PMP? Now, in the early days, of course, it became a peer pressure thing. If you didn't have it, you were no good, and so on. Mm-hmm. We're kind of over that hump now to some extent. And organizations that once, IBM, for example, AT&T, Motorola, who embraced the PMP as their own internal certification, mm-hmm. they've all backed away from that now, and they'll they'll still support it and sponsor people to go, but it's not nearly as critical to your career as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people
Why do you think that is?
Because we see job ads all the time say PMP required. Well, that's true. I mean, they're going to do that, but that's more of a peer pressure sort of a thing. If you have it, you're okay. If you don't, you suck. And so people have started to realize just having the PMP ain't what it's all about. I tell my people that those of you who think that getting your PMP is the end of the journey, oh man, you're screwed up. It's the beginning of the journey.
Absolutely.
And so what happens is expectations go up. Your performance is under more of a microscope. So I tell people, if you're not ready for that, don't get the PMP, because with it comes a tremendous amount of responsibility.
I'm going to ask you a daring question. This is a question that I often discuss with people when they talk about certification. And you can give me a couple answers, but in order, what do you think is the number one? What should the number one motivation be to get a PMP?
Personally driven, the sense of accomplishment.
Okay.
Because once you begin to understand the PMP, it's pretty heady stuff. I mean, it really gives you what you need as a base for doing a good job as a project manager.
Yeah, common language, common process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, something that, I can change companies and I'm still talking the same language when I get to the other company. And so I think
so. It gives you career relevance and stability.
Yeah,
you don't have to learn a new language.
It's not the T thing, but here's what I've developed over the last few years. As I tell people, the first thing you do is you get a job. Baby needs shoes. You got a Mercedes. You got a house. But give me a job, okay? Yeah. Well, that job will last you a bit. And satisfy you a bit, but pretty soon you're going to go like, is this all there is? Mm-hmm. And so you then transition to what I call a career. Mm-hmm. And then by doing that, you say, okay, I did this for 7 years, but I really was never happy with that, but it brought in money. Mm-hmm. So what would I really like to do? So you transition to a career. Spend a long time in your career motivating yourself, improving yourself. But then the last step in my model is a calling, what I call a calling.
Yeah.
This is what, I mean, I'm in a call. I moved through the phase. I'm at the calling stage. This is what I do. This is what I'm about. This is what I get value out of. And I think if people will begin to look at that, they'll see, well, then there has to be a constant level of improvement. I can't just isolate on, I got my PMP, man, I can relax now. Yeah. No, now you got to show people you know how the hell to use it.
Well, I think that's part of the baked-in philosophy that I don't know whether everybody really understands it, but I think PDUs kind of forces you to deal with it. I love the concept of PDUs because it says, we're not interested in a bunch of Boy Scouts who are going to get a merit badge, who are going to invest maybe 6 weeks of their life learning something by rote memory, and then get a badge on their sleeve, and then never ever deal with the subject matter again. I think that's a great concept. Was that something that you guys came up with when you were developing the certification?
Yeah, I think people never give us credit. They get angry with us for having PDUs, but the fact of the matter was, one of the things we discussed is longevity. How do we sustain the life of this process? And the answer is because the business changes and has certainly gone through many changes. The only way to keep up with that is the idea of PDU, CEU. They've been around forever. It's not like we thought them up.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter,
it's still a great idea.
It came out clear when Agile came out because. Yeah. We were waterfall, we were predictive people, and here all of a sudden is this totally new. Although
you're pushing buttons now, Lee.
Yeah, and so
I might give you some pushback on some of those statements, but yeah, I understand where you're going.
You do PDUs. I mean, that's why we invented them. Unfortunately, the PDU thing turned into a numbers game. And I'm very
there's always a danger of that. There's always people who are gonna look at it from a systematic perspective and put a dogmatic process behind it and try to monetize it. But I don't think that discounts the original meaning. I would agree
hope
with you
not. I think it's the only way a person stays ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
What I tell people when I talk to them is one of the things that paid off for me is thinking a year or 2 years ahead of time, what's going to come down the road. And then by the time it gets there, hell, I was already ready.
Yeah.
And that's what people need to do. They don't understand that. They're still in how many PDUs do I need? It's not about how many PDUs you need. It's what knowledge you need that earns PDUs.
Lee, quite honestly, I think if you've embodied and understood the foundational concept behind it, I always jokingly say when people say how difficult is it to get PDUs, I said, I've got so many. Do you want some?
Yeah, me too. I mean, can you imagine how many I get speaking?
I'm sure you could. You're leagues ahead of me. But like I said, I think I just want to give you my quick take on it. A lot of people will say, I do certification because I want a badge of honor. Okay, yeah. Will it help you with your career? Yeah. I said, but the actual reason and I wish that more people would see it this way. I think the actual reason why the PMP is such a valuable institution in certification, and for me, it's still the gold standard of certification. All the other ones are way further down the row. Is because it's about committing to a common language. It's about committing to a common understanding. I think the biggest illness or problem that we have, generationally speaking, in our discipline of project management is that there's new generations that come up and they're faced with the same problems and the same challenges that generations before them were faced, okay? And they have to come up with a solution, and they're constantly reinventing the wheel. And I don't think that the PMBOK guide or certification can eliminate what you mentioned. There's always going to be new facets, that will rejuvenate or accentuate or add to it. But that's where I would give you pushback. A lot of people act like Agile is something new. Quite honestly, the first time I read Jeff Sutherland's book on Scrum, I said, wow, this is a really great book. I agree with everything that's in here. But I knew this already 15 years ago because for me it was common sense. Just like you said, originally when you did the PMP certification, the questions you asked were based on people who have experience. I mean, I looked at it and I said, this is like my roadmap for how I do execution in projects. Project management is not only initiation and planning, it's execution. And then, doing iterative cycles, it's not new to me. I never separated the two, So what I often say is when I do waterfall projects, there's always an Agile element to it. And this is where I piss off some of my Scrum teams. When I do Agile projects, when I do initiation and planning, I force them through some waterfall things that, this is outdated. We don't need. I'm like, no, this is. I mean, I think they're a perfect match. I never saw the conflict of interest. What do you think about it? What do you think about the whole new Agile thing? Is it some people might say it's a revolution or an evolution. What's your take on the last 10 years? Although Agile's been around a lot longer than 10 years.
Oh yeah, hell of a lot longer. What I tell people is Agile is predictive with some new terminology.
Yeah. A lot of it is redundant. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now there is one thing. I mean, I always get this question at the end of every one of my presentations. What do you think about Agile? So I've sort of got a canned thing in that I like Agile in terms of the process, because it's no different than what I've been doing for 50 years already.
And if it makes you happy calling it something else, good for you.
Instead of WBS, they call them stories. Instead of learning curve, they call them retrospectives. I mean, they got all.
Instead of calling it a meeting, you call it a ceremony.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of calling it a milestone, you call it a release. Okay.
I think that Agile has some one big advantage that I like about Agile is a much more frequent statusing of accomplishment versus expectation.
It goes to the core, I think, of the biggest weakness or the biggest challenge that we as project managers have always faced. And actually, I just posted something on LinkedIn yesterday. I sometimes put all my smart ass comments on there. But I wrote something to the effect that the number one things that sponsors and clients like to ignore is, the classical triple constraint, faster, cheaper, and the number one thing that project managers never get tired of repeating, so that our sponsors and clients, I think the beautiful thing about Agile is it doubles down on this issue that whether we like it or not, it's kind of like kabuki theater, right? We have these pre-described roles. Sponsors act in a certain way because that's the way they think they need to act. And project managers are kind of that counterweight. And there's always a certain conflict of interest. And I think Agile just says, you know what? In a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, the only way to overcome this is not to predetermine everything, which makes a lot of sense, and kind of do it in iterative cycles, learning by doing, or whatever the heck you want to call it. Plan, do, check, act. I mean, Edwards Deming actually was a precursor to the project management process groups and was a precursor to Agile, in my opinion.
No, I think you're right. I've read a lot of Deming's work, and hell, it's like I could have written this.
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
No, I try to make it clear because I sort of have a reputation of being anti-agile. It's not true at all. So I have to try to make sure that people
I'm with you.
Clear.
I'm the same.
Yeah. It's and predictive is never going to go away. The waterfall approach is never going to go away.
Yeah. Actually, I do some training work for a large IT company. And they always tell me that their clients, because they're an IT company, their clients expect them to work Agile.
Yep.
But the products that they sell are so complex, the only way for them to make a healthy margin and deliver in quality is to be fairly dogmatic with how they implement the system. So in reality, their projects by nature, I would say about like 80% predictive and 20% Agile, right? But they have to use the Agile nomenclature because otherwise the clients get irritated.
Sure. If they're IT, they got to talk Agile. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy the way it works out. But the PMI is causing a little problem with this as well, because as they transition to Agile and in the 6th edition, they put in some Agile stuff so they could claim they were current. But now they've gone overboard. Now the feedback I get from people who take the exam is that it's about 70% Agile. PMI will claim 50-50. That's what they claim, 50-50. But the people who take the damn exam are saying that's not accurate. It's 70% Agile.
I wouldn't be surprised. Or at least what they call falls under that clause of tailoring. You know what I think it is? I think Goliath was afraid of David. You know, hands down, PMI is the largest professional organization. There's no IPMA doesn't come close. None of the Agile they're kind of like little tribes that that they can't even agree with their own vocabulary. If you look at the difference between Crystal and Scrum and Kanban and everybody has to reinvent the wheel. But what I think that the Agile, and this is where we have to, hands down, give them credit. I think let me take a step back. I think every generation needs to claim the topic for themselves. And part of the process, and you can see this in our language, our language evolves. So the way we talk as teenagers is different than our kids will talk as teenagers because they're claiming their own language, which I think is fine. A lot of it is redundant, but that's good. So I like the fact that newer generations are claiming the topic. Sometimes I wonder whether they're wasting time reinventing the wheel. And I also think what we can give credit to the Agile organizations is they've readdressed issues that we just took as the status quo in classical project management,
Yeah.
And they said, no, that's not the way it should be, But the funny thing about this is another thing I think is, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Agile, although it sometimes doesn't sound like it. The very first principles of Agile, which I would totally underline, are often violated as soon as a company says, we want to work Agile. For example, small teams, co-located, fully dedicated, right? How many companies can manage that? How many companies do we know? I mean, there's plenty of examples, but I can name you equally as many examples of companies where the team is dislocated over 7 countries, 3 time zones. They do it on the side next to their line job, right? So I think the challenges of project management are eternal, and I think the solutions are eternal. And if we have to repackage it to make it interesting and to find a new approach, I'm all for it.
Well, you have to remember that interest, as you pointed out, sponsors have a different set of criteria that they're working to. And unfortunately, they're a big part of the problem, because every year they approve more projects than we have people that can deliver them, and then punish the people who don't make schedules.
Yeah.
So I think until management wakes up and understands that with the matrix idea, it's a bitch to have multiple projects where a guy's running from one to the other to another.
Let me ask you a question, because this is I think anybody who's as committed to our discipline as we are will have a similar feeling, but I want to hear it from your mouth. What do you think the state of understanding projects, programs, and portfolios is in the corporate world?
I don't think it's that well known. I think there are some, obviously, that maybe through the baptism of fire have learned it. But the fact of the matter is, senior level people now still look at, what do I need to do to create profitability, and I'll pretend that that's what I'm going to do until they get to a point where they've lost control of the process, and then they start blaming people. And project management, I've had people say to me, what the hell, you got 2 failed projects, you're using project management? Yeah, exactly. If I could just get the bosses to understand that, I'd be in good shape.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Chaos Report and the Gartner Group reports that used to come out annually. And I used to love it because, you always have to look at it. I love Churchill's statement, don't believe any statistic that you didn't make up yourself. But I think they're fairly indicative. You know how they do these studies, how many projects are, although they never say what the criteria for success rating is. It's in scope, in time, in budget, plus or minus 10%. And they say, across the board, 38 to 40%. Large projects, it's 8%, depending on who you ask. And I love it that because they're also consulting firms, and we're both consultants as well, so I can empathize. They'll come up with their checklist because the clients want you to analyze, well, why is the success rate so low? And they usually have like 10, 15 articles, and it's usually like the project manager isn't trained, you're not using an enterprise software. And what they basically, all the points that they mention are products and services that you could buy from somebody. And for me, the number one reason why projects fail is rarely on that list. And the number one reason, in my opinion, is because whoever came up with scope, time, and cost is trying to pull one over. It's unrealistic.
Exactly.
I mean, if you set an impossible goal, you can't be surprised that it's a classical thing. I mean, there was an opera house that was built in Hamburg. They estimated it would cost $90 million, and it cost $920 million. Okay? Had they right off the bat said it cost $800 million, okay, and they came to 920, nobody would look at them as major failure. It's where you set your targets, which defines whether you're failing or not, And I think the number one thing that we could all deserve, and I think also on an executive level, I think that's where the tie-in is. And that's what I love also about the mandate of PMI. I think PMI, in a very diplomatic way, understands that its mandate is also kind of to do lobbying amongst executives,
Yeah, I think with our new guy, Pierre Lamont, he gets this to an extent better than any of the prior. I mean, I've worked with all of them from the start. When it was just
I was a fan of some of them. I was not a fan of others.
There's most of them. I don't think I'd hire them myself. But the fact of the matter, I mean, even Sunil, I'm great friends with Sunil. He was
very savvy from a social media perspective.
He just didn't understand the not-for-profit world.
Yeah,
and that was his downfall. So Pierre, I think, gets it. He's doing a lot of the right things. But I tell people with their projects, and they don't like me to tell you this, but the fact of the matter is, almost every project you take on, you are starting behind schedule.
Yes.
Because of this matrix thing.
Yes.
We don't get all the people all the time, and we plan. This is our problem. we plan in effort hours. So we talk an expert, how long does it take? Says 8 hours. Okay. Yeah. Put 8 hours in the schedule. Well, they didn't bother telling you this guy's also committed to 3 other jobs at the same time. So his 8 hours is 4 days for you. And that's the way projects are. And then people wonder, well, why the hell am I behind schedule?
You're talking
behind schedule.
You're talking about such a basic concept, which is the crux of the matter. I think very few people understand that their misunderstanding of effort versus duration is the cause of a lot of their problems.
Oh, it's huge.
And then instead of dealing with it and doubling down on it, we come along with Agile and come up with story points and ideal time, and nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. It's just another attempt of identifying duration and effort. I think classical reason why we are often behind schedule.
No, I agree. I don't, and the sad thing is I don't think it's ever going to change.
Yeah.
As soon as we started to work in a matrix world, we introduced this problem that's really systemic to failure.
You're saying one of my favorite words, matrix. Another bingo word, which I think is great if people understood it. Let's do a simple. I think a lot of people who are PMPs, I think can off the bat understand the matrix, but in the PMP, it's kind of limited to what I call a two-dimensional matrix, right? So you have the line organization, which a lot of people say doesn't exist. It exists. It has existed for the last 10,000 years. It will exist for the next 10,000 years. I don't care what consulting firm comes along and tells you about flat organizations or agile organizations. At the end of the day, the organization that makes hardcore money is the one that works in the system. And that's a linear organization that has a vertical distribution and a horizontal distribution of responsibility, because that's the most effective and efficient way to make money with things that are not complex. So project management comes along and says, yes, but not everything is easy to do. Some things are complex, and therefore we need project. So that was that two-dimensional concept. Let me throw an idea at you. I think that in the next years, I think it's already happening, the concept of having a two-dimensional matrix is going to be expanded substantially, because also as an engineer, you'll know this. It's not only project management that works across all functional line departments, change management, or sometimes they call it operational excellence. You having worked for GE, I'm sure you were substantially exposed to Six Sigma.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that is also a classical cross-functional thing, right? I think AI could be a future cross-functional discipline that kind of serves the whole organization. Would you agree with that? And you see that project management, because it has superior matrix understanding, might be a good hub for some of those topics?
Yeah, I actually think it's almost going to be mandatory as we move forward to operate in that way. And I don't think ignoring it's going to solve the problem.
Yeah. One of my favorite companies that I've already done a podcast with, their head of project management, I don't think they call it PMO anymore. I think they call it project excellence or something like that. But it's basically a PMO. They're responsible for maintaining programs and portfolios, doing executive reporting, all that classical stuff. But at the same time, they're responsible for cross-functional risk management and for quality management. That's another example of, looking at matrix is more than a two-dimensional, but a 3, 4, and even engineering. I mean, engineering is often a department that doesn't serve itself alone. It services other parts and has to interact with other parts of the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's the other issue that you got to throw in here is not only are they assigning individuals to multiple projects, they're also asking those individuals to do maintenance work as part of their job responsibility. So now you got to take 30% of their time away to do maintenance work. And people bitch about that all the time. How can I do project work when you're asking me to do 30% of general maintenance work? Yeah. I think somebody's got to get a grip on this.
Yeah. I think there's also the crossover between project portfolios and product portfolios is another issue that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think the very concept that a project has a beginning and an end is a great concept, but operationally it poses a huge problem.
It does. I agree. And the other problem is that people begin to falsely recognize when they're done.
Yeah.
It's not when you hand it over, it's the life it's going to live. I mean, if you hand over a project that was done on time, on budget, and it doesn't do shit out in the field, sorry for the language.
Yeah. No, you're talking to PM Cowboy. I'm familiar with shit. It's good.
Yeah, it's just it's that old throw it over the wall. I'm done with it.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking that way, then you're not thinking the way you should be thinking as you execute the project.
Yeah. So if you were to look in the crystal ball, or maybe you already have maybe you've already spotted a couple things in the crystal ball, where do you think PMI certification and topics in the PMBOK are going?
Good question. I think first of all, certification is here to stay. That's not going to change.
I think we need to pep it up a little bit, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think it needs and here. This is the beauty of Pierre. He came on not understanding what it was. Now he got his. He took the test, already passed. But the fact of the matter
better
is,
than some of his predecessors.
Yeah, and he's realized that the cash cow is certification.
Yeah.
I mean, when you got 1.5 million and your next closest is 70,000, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that's where I want to focus.
Well, my biggest competitor here in Austria was IPMA.
Oh yeah. Oh, sure.
And the difference between PMI and IPMA is that nationally, the national organizations get the brunt of that money. Do you know what the competing budget from the IPMA? IPMA in Austria had a $500,000 budget.
Really?
Yeah. And when we came on in Austria, they told us, you have no chance against these people. They're established. We kicked their butt. I have no problem saying it on screen. We kicked their butt with a 0. But the reason I'm mentioning that is not to make myself or my team sound great. Although thanks a lot to my team from back then. I'm saying it because if you have the right spirit, you can do a lot. It's not only about the money. And I agree with you that I think that PMI is wise to look at the certification as a cash cow. I wish they would do more about their understanding membership, though.
Yeah, I'm working on that right now. I think one of the reasons they want me out in the field is so I don't be here to bother them, because I definitely I think they've undercut the membership. I mean, we have a 1.5 million PMPs. We only have 650,000 members.
That's a mistake.
Now, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out there's something wrong with that number. And so, I mean, if people are joining just to get the discount, there's something wrong with the membership.
And I absolutely, thank you, Lee. Can I tell you another crazy thought? I remember when this is a long time ago, but when we founded PMI Chapter Austria, we used to go to all these meetings and stuff, and we would meet, the chapter presidents from Germany and the chapter presidents from France and the chapter presidents from London. There were multiple at the time. And I remember the standard question, I don't know if you've ever experienced, the number one question was always, what chapter are you from? And the second question right out of the barrel was, how many members do you have?
Yep.
You know what my answer was? I don't know. And I don't care.
Yeah.
And they would look at me like I'm a heathen. And then I said, you know what? Ask me the more relevant question. And they go, what's that? I said, ask me how many people I have in my database who are there intentionally and who we interact with and invite to our events monthly. And they go, how many? I go, 5,000 to 7,000. Okay? Yeah. And I think I'm hoping for PMI, this is something I would love to tell them if they were to listen. I wish they would kind of reactivate their understanding of membership, and that I think certification is a great vehicle. I think it can be something that we rally around, something that creates unity. But I wish, it used to be a time when PMI used to publish on a regular basis its membership, and it would always go up and up and up. And I think they just don't understand what the value of it is, and that's why I sometimes wish that they would stop getting people from the outside of PMI to lead PMI, and maybe get somebody from the inside who actually understands how the organization works. Although I think I'm very happy that we have Pierre, and I wish him all the best, and I'm sure he'll do a great job. I think some of the other CEOs or presidents just didn't really understand the nature but hats off to him that he got the PMP. That's already a step in the right direction. I never understood how anybody can represent an organization that doesn't have the certification that it's famous
I
for.
agree. He's making it mandatory for most of his management team. So,
he should. He should.
Yeah,
I mean, how can you preach water and drink wine? That just doesn't work that way.
I get the question all the time: how many people at corporate, although they're all now distributed because of the pandemic, but how many people at corporate have their PMP? Not that many.
Yeah.
Not that many. People in positions that should definitely have it don't have it.
Yeah.
And so Pierre's recognized that, and he's putting the pressure on. He's saying, look, if this is the organization you're going to work for and represent, you have to go by the same standards as everybody else. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think we lost track of what a member really looks for. And the past year or so, there's been a group of us working on chapter engagement, meaning membership engagement, to find out why are they coming and leaving at such a rapid rate? Why are we not retaining members? Now, the reason for that is I used to work a lot for volunteer groups, JCs, and we found it was a lot easier to get new members than it was to retain the old ones. I think that's still true. If you don't provide something for the old ones that keep them coming back.
You know what the old ones need? Tell me what the old ones need.
What do you mean?
What do you think the old ones need? Because I'm an old one.
They need to be involved. They need to
feel... maybe some semblance of appreciation.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. I spent 10 years as a chapter president, completely personally with my own personal checkbook, covered whatever financial risk because of the legal status of PMI in Austria, covered it with my own checkbook, okay? Did endless events. We did larger national events that PMI Europe did, okay? And I don't need anybody to blow my horn or toot my horn, but any form of appreciation in hindsight. And you and I could probably go through a list of different chapter presidents we know who were trailblazers, okay, that nobody talks about anymore. There's a couple of them. I think it's great that PMI has this fellow concept, Thomas Valenta, I'm sure that you're familiar with.
Oh, I know Tom.
Al Zaytoun. I mean, these are icons of the PMI world, and they should be fellows. They should be held up. And that's why, and that's why I was so thrilled when I saw you on LinkedIn. I said, this is where the spirit of PMI should be going. And if I can do anything to even in a mild way to get your name out there even more and to show appreciation for what you do, I wanted to have this opportunity to talk to you.
I appreciate that. I'm like you. I'm not looking for personal attention. I already know I'm great. So I don't need to have a bunch of people telling me that.
Well, it doesn't help if you have to say you're great. You have to get everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want people out there saying that. And so when I make those personal contacts, people go like, "Why are you doing that? Does that really make a difference?"
It does.
Not to me, it doesn't, but to them, it does. Yeah. I mean, I've got people who, when I contact them, it's like, "Oh my God, this is Lee Lambert, the founder of the PMP. He's talking to me directly." I mean, that guy, hell, he'll be flying high for days. And so that's what I think we need to do. Yeah.
I interviewed one of my last podcasts. I interviewed a very dear colleague and professional project manager who was professor for digitalization at a college here in Austria for a while. And he said I know him, he's very, very passionate. He doesn't do anything half-assed. And he was doing it with full-hearted and he eventually left his professor job and went back to consulting. And his justification for it was he was just burnt out and he didn't see that he was making a difference anymore. He didn't feel like he was making a difference. And he said a couple weeks or a couple months after he left his university position, a bunch of students reached out to him without anything on his part. They reached out to him. They said, "Well, why are you no longer professor?" And he said, "Yeah." And he kind of said, "Well, because I was burnt out and I didn't know it was making a difference." And they said, "You know what? You were the main reason why we stayed at university, and you were the number one reason why we believe what we believe and we committed to doing this job." And I'm absolutely in line with you, Lee. I think I think it's the responsibility of the generations that go before us to do that, to kind of be that, that grandfather figure, that uncle figure, that mentor figure, and I also, of course, you also have a consulting firm. I have a consulting firm. Of course, I do it I still have to make money, but at the end of the day, I think people sense that or not. I think it's our job to have a certain missionary flavor to it without wanting to convert people by force, but by convert people by charisma and inspiration. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that'll spell at the end of the day. Here's what PMI is doing, and I think that Pierre's a big part of this. He's changing the emphasis from tools and techniques to people, and they've taken the idea of soft skills, which I've believed in since I was little, and changed it to power skills. And I think in the beginning I thought, what a stupid thing to do, but the more I think about it, the more they are saying basically this people stuff, this communication and this empathy and all of these communication and human aspects are at the end of the day what spells success. And at the end of the day, what people enjoy about project management, they don't enjoy milestones and critical path.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think at the end of the day, if I don't know, maybe you've seen this when you've trained people. My training experiences is most people come to me and say, "Give me processes, give me tools."
Yeah.
And when they understand them, because you make them easy to understand, then they come back to you a couple months or years later and says,
"Yeah, they're not working."
No, the tools are great, but I suck at the interaction. I would say this though. I think it's really important that we don't do too much of a pendulum swing. I'm still a big fan of process and system. I think it's the yin and the yang. You can be a great people person, but if you suck structurally, you're going to have problems in your project.
I agree. No, I agree.
Because I don't know if you've ever looked at the new disciplined Agile, which is kind of a new thing at PMI. They have this.
I was involved in the acquisition.
Okay.
Yeah. So
they have that beautiful word, "wow" way of working.
Wow. Yeah, that was perfect. I love it.
It's good if you truly understand it.
Well,
truly understand it means there's different ways of managing a project, but doing it any which way is not way of working.
No, and that's why I think that didn't work out. That's why Ambler's gone and Mark Lines are gone.
Yeah.
They're trying to save it because the problem is we made an acquisition too late.
Yeah.
We were trying to catch up by acquisition, and it just didn't work. So
I think there was a little bit of fear-based decision making there, and I think PMI, as strong as it is, could have relied a little bit on its good side, but it's good. It's all good. I think it's good that we've pulled Agile into the fold, and I think we'll do fine. I think the very fact that the other Agile organizations are so unorganized and completely overwhelmed with the 50 certifications that they offer.
Right.
And I don't know if I look, I'm not going to name any names, but if I look at any of them, the only thing I don't see community there. I see only money machine. The only thing that it's a money machine, certification. And I won't say any of the certifications. I have some of them. If you look at some of the certifications, great seminars, way too expensive, lots of giveaways, certification easy as hell. And at the end of the certification seminar, I often look around and there's 30 people in the class, which is already a lot. And I feel bad for them because I say, they had a great time, they got their money's worth, but none of these people will actually be able to practice any of this because they didn't take anything away from the seminar. They didn't really learn anything.
No, they got a certificate. That's basically what they got.
Yeah.
And I'm a little leery of PMI in that regard because all of a sudden we have this plethora of certifications, and my question is, so what?
Yeah.
I mean, they said people always ask me, well, what certification would you? I say I get the PMP because it's basically got the substructure you need to be effective.
Yeah.
You don't need. I met a guy in Vegas last year that he gave me his business card, and I had to turn it over on the other side to see all the certifications this guy had. And at the end of the day, I said, do you ever use any of these? Do you ever actually practice? No, but look how good it looks on my
Oh,
card.
it looks good. I've got some Alphabet City going behind my name too.
Wow.
In fact,
Yeah,
every once in a while, I kind of keep track of the different certifications, and every once in a while I see one that I like, and then I ask myself, because this is my main beef with certification right now. I think with modern technology, doing it online is great. I think we need to get a different provider who does the online, because they're a bunch of fascists that run those. They're terrible. I only heard negative feedback.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But one pet peeve, and I had this from a senior project manager that I've been working with for the last 10 years. He's also an engineer. He's building a big factory now in Germany. And he said, well, I want to get my PMP. So I coached him through it and stuff like that. He didn't have a good experience with the online training either. They threw him out because he was looking in the air, and they said, you're cheating. I said, I'm looking in the air.
I've heard that story a lot.
But we got that straightened out. But what really hurts my heart as somebody who's diehard PMI fan and PMP fan, him a little bit, and some other people that I know that got the PMP, it's so difficult to prepare for the exam that in some cases it's no longer a cognitive process of learning. It's a rote memory process.
Yep.
Right? So they're learning vocabulary, they're learning concepts. They don't really know why they're learning it, but the only reason they're learning it is to pass the exam. And I think almost all prep courses go in that direction, which that makes my heart bleed, because I think the number one reason for certification is to show the world that you're committed to the discipline and that you've taken the time to read the user's manual.
Well, and I'll tell you what, and this is blasphemy on my part. I think we let too many people in. I think I have to admit that I was responsible for the application process back in the old days. Way too lax, way too lax. I mean, there are people coming into the PMP world who shouldn't be there, because they did memorize. Now, keep in mind, just so you know, one of the major reasons we changed from 6 to 7, changed from process to principle, is because the process had become very memorizable. And so all people were doing was taking a boot camp, memorizing what they needed to pass the exam, and then go back doing things just the way they always did them. So we hope that moving this to a more principle-based, where you have to apply the concepts yourself, and you can't memorize the PMBOK 7.
Well, you shouldn't have to memorize it. It should be, if you're talking to a professional and you ask him a legitimate question, first of all, the question should be formulated in a way so that an English speaker or a semi-English speaker can understand it, right? I mean, sometimes even as a native speaker, I'm like, I don't understand the question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, all the time.
Let me ask you another question, which I think the Germans are at fault for this semantically, but it used to be when you went for PMP certification, when you were in the application process, you still have to put in your hours that you had. But one of the things I love PMI for is PMI said their definition of, it said you had to be a project manager in the project. But PMI's definition of a project manager was not necessarily that you were the project leader. It was that you had an implemental part in the project, right? I love that concept. Now, I'm going to give you I also speak German, so I think this is where the suspicion came. And the German chapters have had a lot of influence on PMI in a good way primarily. But in German, we have two words that we use. We use the word Projektleiter, which means project leader, and we also have project manager. And I think it's from the German language that PMI picked this up. And if I'm not mistaken, in the new application process, they expect you to be the project leader, and they've kind of said, no, because you're talking about this, not everybody should be able to take it, which I think is terrible, because you can be the project leader of a 10,000 euro project or a project manager in a multi-billion-dollar project, and I think the latter is more impressive than the first. Sure. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. When we were meeting to put this together, we had to come up with a name. And everybody else on the committee but me, which is not unusual, said, we want to call it PPM. professional project manager. I said, well, you can call it that if you want, but you've just limited your market substantially, because I said, when you put a team together, there's one person as a manager, there's 25 other people on the project team that need to understand project management.
Because it's a team sport.
Well,
you don't win with one player, you win with a team.
And so I spent 3 days of my life negotiating that concept, getting people to understand it. And so now we finally end up with PMP, which is where it should be.
Yeah.
I told people, I said, you can be a PMP and never manage a project. Never manage a project. You work
or
on
lead
projects,
a project. You'll manage it, but you won't lead it.
But exactly. And so they bought that. Now here's the problem. When we rolled it out as the gold standard in every place but U.S. and Canada, they expected PMP to be PPM. They expected if I hire PMP, I'm really hiring a PPM, and he's going to move in and immediately be able to do that job and manage that big project.
Yeah.
That's not what we intended. Never was, and I hope never will be, because it's just too small of a. Like you said, you can't do it with one person.
Yeah,
it's just impossible. So
I think it violates the very principle of inclusive collaborative work, which is the nature of project management.
Give me a team of 10 PMPs. That's great. Don't give me a team of 1 PMP. And I think I hope that stays consistent. I hope we stay with that.
Yeah. Lee, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you. I think we could probably talk for hours more, but I want to respect your time as well. This has been great. I hadn't had the opportunity to talk to you in person. I feel like I know you much, much better. My opinion of you has only increased. I want to say in name of all the, and there's plenty of us out there, all the project management cowboys and cowgirls that are out there. I love your spirit. I love your nature. I love your pragmatic, non-dogmatic way, and your absolute charismatic cheerleading for our discipline. I hope you keep it up as long as possible, and you give PMI a hell in a positive, charismatic way as much as you can, in the name of all of us.
Well, I thank you for that. I can tell you I'll keep it up until I'm horizontal.
Lee, once again, thank you so much for everything.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad we connected.